Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J. Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now. Good evening, and welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm your host, John J. Higgins. Tonight I have a fellow author who's had a very interesting life, some of which was her dealing with the British bands of the 1960s, such as the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Jeff Beck, and others. I just finished reading her fascinating book entitled Long-Haired Lads of London, which is now on Amazon for sale. She has also some other books on Amazon, a book in Norwegian, and a poetry book. I'm looking forward to hearing her stories and perspectives on those times that really shifted and opened up society here in England and America, as well as the rest of the world. So without further ado, I want to welcome you, Inger, to my show. I'm so pleased you could join me.
Thank you. I am pleased as well. It's been very interesting to share my stories that I've kept silent about for such a long time.
Well, we're all interested in hearing them. So could you tell us a little bit about your early life?
I was born in a very small village in the fjord in Norway, and I moved to a town near the city of Bergen in Norway when I was 7, and that was the first time I lived in a house with indoor plumbing.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was a good life. It was a very charmed life for us kids. We had lots of playmates and a whole, town and village to roam around and freely. We had everything we needed basically, and it was a good life. And summers my family spent in our house in the country, and we had a huge family, really big family living close by. So there was always lots of uncles and aunts and grandparents and cousins, and so yeah, it was. I'm happy about my childhood.
Well, and at some point you leave that area. So could you tell us about that?
Well, I was becoming a teenager, and I had seen an ad in it. I was adventurous, and I was a little bit different than most people. So I saw this ad in the paper that somebody in England was looking for an au pair, and I knew there were other girls who had, after school finished, going to England or Germany or even Denmark as au pair goes for a year or so. To learn the language and for some adventure. So I applied for the job and got it. So I went to London when I was still 17.
Wow, that was quite a brave thing to be doing. What was that, in the early 1960s? It was
1963. Yeah, I was scared. I was a bit apprehensive, I must say.
Well, it's quite a courageous thing for a teenager to do. This, I think, think about that.
My mother was not happy.
I can imagine. And was your father alive at that time, or had he passed already?
He was. My father was first in the Merchant Marines, and then he was working for the government on a ship that did research in the ocean. So he was away a lot, and he had spent a lot of time in England. So he didn't interfere too much in the home life or upbringing because he basically wasn't there. Unfortunately, he became quite ill with cancer and died my first year in London in 1964.
So I guess you flew over to England then?
No, we took, hardly anybody flew back then. I took the ferry from Bergen to Newcastle and then the train from Newcastle to London. It was very exciting. But I was so glad when that man came there to pick me up at the airport, at the train station, because, I'd never seen so many people in one place before. And they all spoke English, and everything was just so different.
Now, did you speak English a lot then, or was it something you picked up?
I spoke school English. It was one of my best. In school, I used to get a 6 in English because I was very interested in the United States mostly. I loved America, everything American. So, so I knew English. I knew school English, but coming to London and understanding all the, and England, where there had just so many different dialects and it was hard to communicate. And then there is, on top of just knowing a language, is also all the different associations and the jokes and the things. So it was hard.
Well, I know as an American, listening to some of the British recordings, with some of the Beatles and some of the Cockney accents and whatever, I don't think I could understand what they were saying at times.
Yeah.
So, and I was native to English.
Yeah, it's Liverpudlian was a fascinating dialect too.
So you're an au pair in this house. So then tell us what happens.
Well, I sort of was a bit unstable after my father died, and I'd met this young French woman she was older, she was very sophisticated, and I was sort of flattered, of course, of her befriending me. So she told me, so one day she came and she said she had read in the paper that a guy that she knew from Hamburg was playing with a band that was making quite a name for themselves in England, and she wanted to go and meet him, and would I like to to come with her? So I said yes, and I did, and the band was the Pretty Things, and he was the drummer. And in the course of the evening, and I was talking with the singer who seemed to quite like me, and he said, it seemed like the band knew this girl, or the drummer knew this girl, and I guess they looked at me, so recognized the country bumpkin, and just told me that I should just stay away from her and not be in her company. So, to make a long story short, I basically ended up living for months with the bass guitarist John Stax's family in London for many months, and I have contact with them to this day. It's just
wow.
And I was with the Pretty Things all the time, really, until I went back to Norway. So that's for summer. I just stayed the summer in Norway because my mom was sick.
Okay. Well, I don't think the radio people are going to see this, but when I put this thing up on YouTube, they will see that, I mean, you were certainly beyond stunningly beautiful, so I can understand why the band was interested in you from what I've seen about bands. So, I mean, that certainly, I don't think it was the country bumpkin attraction that they had for you. Yeah, so.
I don't know. I just never thought of that when I was that age. I guess it dawned on me every once in a while. I wondered why they were my friends, but no, we had fun, so I didn't really think about it.
Well, I think your personality, helps with friendships and that kind of thing. But the point of entree, a lot of times is that pretty people and whatever it opens doors, a lot easier sometimes. So
maybe some doors that should remain shut. Well,
and that's true too. I mean, although I think at that time it was a little bit. I don't think it was quite as. I'm trying to use the word cynical, but not. I don't mean that, but dangerous. I think it's been much more dangerous as time has gone on for that.
Yeah, I agree.
So you were staying at this house, and you went home for the summer. So that would have been the summer of '64.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I came back to London in the fall.
And I mean, that's kind of you seem to have a draw to London at this time for some reason. Could you explain that a little bit?
I love London. I just love living there.
Okay.
And of
So you
course,
didn't want to
I was in love with the singer of the Pretty Things, and then I had met the Rolling Stones just a few weeks before I went to Norway, and this, had a little fling with Mick Jagger, who, also, it was very hard not to be drawn to. And,
yes, he seems to have a lot of charisma.
Mick Jagger?
Yes.
Yeah. And he's actually a really pretty nice guy. At least he was back then. Life changes all of us, but he was a really nice guy, and he was smart.
Well, I have a sense that most people don't survive in that business either, unless they have a certain amount of niceness to them.
Yeah.
All the other ones seem to burn out fairly quickly. Maybe you could, because that was kind of an interesting tale you had. Maybe you could tell us a little bit of how you met Mick Jagger and the Stones that time.
Oh yeah, I was sitting with the Pretty Things at this place. All the groups and all the musicians used to hang out in a street called Denmark Street. It was a recording studio there and a little cafe, and I think there must have been various managers and things, and it was just a very short little street there. It was very unassuming, but we spent a lot of time there, and we were in this calf having some tea, and I was waiting for Phil May, who had promised to take me out for dinner and a movie. And while we were sitting there, because Phil never showed up, we were sitting there.
Now Phil was from the Pretty Things.
Yeah, and
okay.
He never came. And this guy came over and was talking to us. And he seemed to know. One of the Pretty Things used to be a member of the Rolling Stones.
Right.
And so this guy turned out to also have been one of the original members of the Rolling Stones, and his name was Stu, and he was working with the Stones. He worked with the Stones till he died, actually. And
okay.
So he invited me to come. And the Stones were doing a radio show at BBC Playhouse, and he invited me to come around there, and I didn't want to go. That was so I was talked into it basically, and I went with him, and the Rolling Stones were up on stage when I walked in, and of course I'd seen them on TV, on the telly, so I knew who they were, but they weren't. You didn't know the various band members' names, so you introduced me to all of them, and there were other stars of the day there making this show, and then after it was over, and Stu asked if I wanted to come along because they were the Stones were doing a concert just in one of the suburbs to London that night, and by that time I thought, I said yeah, because I liked them all, and I got to go with them, and it was just very fascinating because it was early days, and you had to deal with all the fans and setting up all the groups there, and it was just I'll never forget it. It's just so clear in my mind, even after all these years. It was just very, very intense. And
well, Beatlemania had already hit by then, right?
Yeah, and this was a taste of Beatlemania.
Right, and the Stones were like the second big band that really followed them.
Yeah, and they were very
different. States, yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, at least in the United States, that's where I remember. I mean, I was maybe 10 years old, so
Yeah.
But I did know about their existence and all that was happening with all of that.
Yeah, they were very different to the Beatles, but yeah.
Well, I remember John Lennon had said at one point, because the Beatles were like the good boys and the Stones were like the bad boys, and
right.
I think he was a little envious. He wanted to be the bad boy, so.
Yeah. I don't know how true that is.
But they were all young, right? I mean, everybody's in their, early 20s at best.
Yeah.
So,
they were all trying to achieve their big dream, and they worked very hard at it.
Yeah. So you go to the concert or whatever, and then what happens?
Well, we went to the concert, and there was, there was a throng of people outside, and making. I was in the car with Stu, and Mick and Keith was in the back. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and then the rest of the band was coming in a different car. So Mick and Keith was just, the police just had to, basically it was like parting of the sea. In the Bible, the police just had to make like a roadway for them to run through from the car and into the stadium, to the place where we were, where they were supposed to be doing the concert. And there were other people there too. Peter and Gordon was quite a big name at that time, so they were there.
Well, I think, wasn't that the story where you needed a little light for your cigarette or something, and Keith popped out of the van?
Yeah, can you imagine? I still can't believe he actually did that.
Well, maybe you could tell us that story, because that's kind of cute.
Yeah, it is. We were sitting in afternoon traffic, and the car was like hardly moving, and I needed light for my cigarette. I was smoking at the time, which I don't anymore, but and all of a sudden Keith Richards just go, give the lady a light or something, and he just disappeared out. I think we all just about had a heart attack when he just disappeared out of the car like that. But he'd seen like a tobacconist store on the corner there, and he ran in, and he actually got cigarettes and a light and came back. And he managed to get back in the car before that traffic started moving again. He was another guy that was just really, really nice. Just good people. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just funny to think of that whole thing going on.
I know. I just wondered now. I'm thinking back, and I think, well, because all these people sitting in their car going home after, a hard day in the office, and I thought, what did they think when they saw Keith Richards, this rock and roll star going through, winding his way through the traffic on foot? Yeah.
Right.
It was cute.
So then you go back to Norway, right, for that summer, and then you come back.
Yeah, and then I come back. And I kept in contact. I kept in contact with Stu. And
so where were you living when you where were you living when you came back the second time? Because you're no longer an au pair, correct?
I came back the second time as an au pair. It was the only way I could get into the country, basically, and stay. If as a tourist, I could only stay for a short while. Okay. So back then it was really strict working permits and even for people who played in bands or were models and whatever, it was just very strict.
Right.
So I went back as an au pair, and I really disliked the family that I was staying with, and they didn't pay us when they should, and it was just a very bad situation. So Ian Stewart, Stu, just, I was, complaining to him one day, and he just said, I'm coming over to get you. Just pack your things. And he talked to the man of the house, and the next thing I knew, I was packed, and Stu came with another guy, and they just put me in the car, and he drove me to where they were staying. They shared a house with Glenn Johns, who I think is quite well known by now as a recording engineer.
Right, he did Led Zeppelin and all kinds of bands at the time, right?
Yeah, and the Beatles, and
Right.
And most of the early Rolling Stones albums he did.
Okay.
So he and Stu and another guy, they had a bungalow in Surrey, outside of London, and I went to live there.
Okay. And so then what happened?
Well, oh God, that's a hard story. I met Jeff Beck and just fell in love with him and started an affair with him, and Stu and Glenn was a bit upset, so they told me I had to find another place to stay, and so I moved back to London. And,
well, how did you meet Jeff Beck?
Oh, we went to a place called Ilpai Island. I went to Stu because the guy Brian was playing there, so we went to see his group, and in his group, the night shifts, a young Jeff Beck played, and I was just fascinated by his playing. I just thought he was so amazing.
Right, he's one of the best guitarists ever. Him, Clapton, Jimmy Page, they were all like in the same kind of. They were all tied to the Yardbirds at one point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so was Clapton. Yeah.
Yeah,
so.
All those musicians, they knew each other. They hung out at the same places, and Stu. I used to go with Stu a lot around to demonstrate to recording studios, and even when the Stones were on tour, they were close by. I used to go with him and hang out in the dressing room. So. Or go to their offices and go with them to their offices in London. So for a while there, I was around them quite a bit. And once I went into a recording studio with Stu to give a friend of his a lift, and it was Jimmy Page. But that was way before he started playing with Led Zeppelin.
Right. Well, I think it sounded to me when I was reading your book that it was they really had become their own kind of community. Yeah. In the London area. It was kind of surprising to me how much they were hanging out with one another, and it was almost like crossbreeding with the bands, and at this point, in time, they all look so famous and celebrity and whatever. So it's hard to imagine, those early days. Yeah, I think they probably still have contact with each other, and in a way it makes sense, because people who work and whose job is the same, and I saw that when I worked for the oil companies in Norway in the 80s, that they all seemed to know each other and went to the same places, and they were all international. Right. Yeah. Right. And then thinking back too, with like the recordings at the time, there was a lot of progress made in how recordings were even done. Yeah. They I guess the multi-track kind of approach to things, and then overdubbing and all of that. I'm sure they were all kind of experimenting, with their own kind of music. Well, at that point, right, the Beatles hadn't come out with Sgt. Pepper, which was supposedly one of the big changes. Yeah,
it was it was changing very fast in the 60s. Everything. It was just Even from the time from just 64 to 65, there was big changes. And then, of course, when I came over to the States, I was because something seems to have started in the States and then sort of went across the ocean to England, and the British bands came over to the States and brought things back with them and brought things here. So it was a lot of crossbreeding, like you said, but it was wonderful creativity. Just brought us some incredible music.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was in your book I read that, or because I read a lot of stuff in the course of a day.
Yeah.
But it was really it was actually an article I think by Gene Simmons with his son in one of the a magazine about he's claiming now that rock and roll is dead, and that when you think of all like the classic kind of stuff, it really comes from the 60s and maybe early 70s.
Yeah.
But there's not so much that comes after that.
Right.
And
maybe glam came after that and disco, but it doesn't seem to have the staying power as the early 70s music.
Right. It just didn't survive. I mean, it's like a niche at best.
Yeah.
So I think that's really very interesting. I had a friend in high school that we had a local recording studio. It was hidden in the back of this guy's house. His name was Tony Camillo in Hillsborough, New Jersey, and my friend's name is Dave Dominich. I think he's been working with Lenny Kravitz after that. And he was like a kid, and he was doing the engineering work for Gladys Knight and the Pips. And they would come down there. And I know there was a time that Anne Margaret was coming down, and we told us that we could come meet her or whatever. And I was
wonderful.
I guess I don't know if I was shy or whatever, but I said I don't have anything in common with her. What am I going to do? Stand there and gack at her?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of the thing that I kind of figured out. So when you say that, with all these bands, with hanging out with one another, they're all changing music. So it had to be like a really vital and thrilling time for all of them.
Yeah, I think so. And
right.
They always talked music.
Right. And that's what I'd always say. I'm not a musician. So, what do I have really to talk to them about? Oh, I really love your song. So now you went back to Norway and then you came back to London again, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a lot. It was my family was there, so of course I went back and forth quite a bit, but also because it was very difficult to get a work permit. So I did actually go back to Norway, and then I started art school, but then I was presented with the offer to move to the United States and get a green card from a family friend, and I decided to do that. It was a tough decision, but yeah, that's what I did. And I emigrated in 1966.
Okay. So you come to the United States, and you went to California first?
I came to New York first. And
okay.
Yeah, I worked in New York, and actually when the Stones were there, Stu came to see me in New York, and I did some traveling from there. I did some modeling in between things, and I was just basically too young to really think about making any kind of career of anything. I didn't, so I became fascinated with the hippie lifestyle, and I went to San Francisco with some friends. I had a girlfriend from New York who moved out there. She was a stewardess. So and she was stationed in San Francisco. So I went out there with another friend, and I really loved it. I went back to England a couple of times, to Europe. I backpacked in Europe for a while, and then actually in '68, I moved to California basically for good, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, because that was really the beginning of all the hippie kind of movement, right? And I guess 66, 67, 68.
Yeah, a Summer of Love in '67.
Right, all Kate Ashbury and all of that.
Yeah.
All of that kind of thing.
Yeah. It was. I loved. I'm friends with my roommates and good friends from those days still. It was, and I really cherished that whole the friendship, because it was so. we discovered so much together. I think there was a bond there because of everything we discovered, we went through. I think it was very, it was all love and peace, and and I became very aware of I was very interested in women's and minority situations, and I realized that I wasn't alone. Other people were thinking and feeling the same way and wanted to do something about it.
Right. Well, I think back in that, in the 1960s in the United States, I mean, it was such social upheaval that really, started. I guess some of it was the civil rights, movement that started in the early 60s, and
I remember seeing Martin Luther King coming to Norway to get the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it was in '64.
Oh, okay.
And I saw him on TV. When he arrived in Oslo and he gave his speech, and I just cried. I thought it was just so emotional. I was so proud of Norway for doing that.
Well, it's kind of surprising. I mean, I've studied a lot of American history and that, and how we fight a civil war and then we think we clean that mess up, and that it just kind of switched gears and kind of then became socialized down in the South, and I've always thought that had Kennedy lived, that a lot of things would have been a lot different. I still watch his speeches at times because I don't know of anybody else who could give a speech like him in my lifetime. There was just just the ability to kind of put enthusiasm and hope into whatever the situation was. And then I personally believe he never would have done Vietnam because he learned not to listen to his military advisors. They burned him, and he just never trusted them. He always used his own judgment.
Good
and
for
I
him.
think I don't think LBJ was really capable of that kind of thought process, and so he just kind of walked down that path. And then between the civil rights movement going on, and then with the the opposition to the Vietnam War, I think it really catalyzed the whole generation of the baby boomers to really question, what was really going on in society. And, the hippie thing to me was somewhat of it was kind of a sideline in some ways. It was a naive approach to things. It was just trying to go against and trying to build something in another way that I don't think could have survived. But it certainly was. It was youth.
Yeah.
It was youth at its best.
I think it was also. I think we were actually more aware of things than history allows for.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think there was an awareness. It really hadn't, I don't think, at least in the American society, really hadn't occurred before, because generally there wasn't that kind of, I don't know whether it was that the media let people communicate better or whatever, but, we just didn't have, in history, it wasn't that this whole generation questioned what the government was doing, to any great, we were still kind of marching along with them. So it was really a fascinating time,
Or maybe the questioning began when JFK was shot.
Oh, I think it started, and then when when Martin Luther King was assassinated and Bobby Kennedy right behind that. I mean, you had to figure out that the entire society was falling apart, that we're killing off the best leaders. And no one else was really able to replace them. I was not a Nixon fan at all. I was glad that he had resigned. I was afraid he was going to try to be a dictator, to be honest with you.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was a scary man.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, there were some of them. So now you're back in LA.
Yeah.
And now you have a little boy at this point too. So I thought that was so courageous of you. I mean, you've got you're like a single mother in a day that even that isn't really acceptable yet.
Oh, it's not acceptable at all, no.
And you were trying to hold all of that together.
Yeah. It wasn't
So why don't you give us
easy,
some
but
of
I
the
did.
LA stories?
Pardon?
Yeah. Why don't you give us some of your Los Angeles stories?
Well, I moved to LA in '69 because I had friends there, and it was hard to find work in San Francisco for some reason, and I thought I give LA a chance, and it was very, very difficult in the beginning. It was just horrendous. Because for one thing, the layout of LA, you're completely dependent on a car to get around, and I didn't have one. But it worked out. We survived, and I ran into, by chance, I met some of my old friends from London. Linda, who was Brian Jones's girlfriend, was there. And I met Graham Parsons through her, and ended up going into the recording studio one day with when the Rolling Stones were recording "Let It Bleed." So it was in a way nice to make that connection again.
Right.
Yeah, with my past history. So it was nice, but it was hard. So it was just really, really hard to make it. So I decided to go back to Europe.
Well, I in reading your book, it just seemed to me that you were somehow entwined in the life paths of these other people.
Yeah.
That they keep reappearing in your life, and you keep reappearing in theirs. No matter where in the world you seem to go.
Yeah, it was very strange, and I sometimes questioned why, because I never got an answer. But yes, it just sort of out of nowhere, really, when I wasn't even thinking about it, that something would happen and I would be back in touch.
Right. So now you go back to London, did you say?
I went back to London. I wasn't planning on staying, but I did for almost 2 years. And Linda appeared. I ran into her on Oxford Street in London one day, which was really odd. And so, so we made that connection again. She was married to the folk singer Donovan then, and so I visited with her and at her and Donovan's cottage in the country, and then I spent an Easter weekend as a guest of theirs at a castle in Ireland, which was just such an amazing Easter.
I loved your story about that. If you could tell us about that.
Well, it was we drove up with some family members from London, and I just fell in love with Ireland. It was, and coming into the driveway to this big castle, it was just like out of a fairy tale. It was just amazing. And then one morning when I walked into the kitchen, there was this guy there frying eggs, and he looked so familiar. I was trying to place him, and of course it was George Harrison, wasn't it? and then before I made a total fool of myself, his wife Patty Boyd walked in with Linda. So I think they flew in during the night in a private plane or something. Because this was like early '70s and the height of the Beatles mania. Really, I think they were so big. And
but George Harrison always.
Yeah, we were like about 30 people. It was just amazing that long weekend.
Well, I mean, George Harrison always fascinated me because he seemed to not only be a musician, but somebody who was, really on some spiritual path that he was always seeking. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can tell by his music, too. A lot of his music has to do with his spiritual seeking.
Oh, yeah. Well, I always loved his, I guess his, I don't know if it was his first solo album, but the, All Things Must Pass.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite albums. I mean, what he was able to accomplish, musically with that, and then of course I loved Derek and the Dominoes and Layla and all of that stuff with Clapton, and then because I wasn't, I was still young. And then it turns out that half the people who played on All Things Must Pass played on Derek and the Dominoes and whatever. So there was a lot of crossbreeding there.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. The band really for All Things Must Pass, it was Jim Gordon and Ladle or whatever his name was, and they all go with Clapton after that. So.
Oh, interesting. No, I did not know that. No.
Yeah. It's and that's why I say all that entwinement just seems so fascinating.
Yeah. And
now, was this a real? This was a real castle, like medieval.
Yeah, I think it was built like in 17 something, and
wow.
Yes, it was very medieval, and there was an old, like an old chapel on the premises, and the place was huge. It really was.
Wow.
Yeah, and. And it was an old, like I said, an old chapel on the premises and a graveyard. And it was lovely. And of course, fans were very eager to find out who was staying there, and watched us in binoculars and got drunk and kept knocking on the door in the middle of the night. And
well, I guess that's the days before bodyguards and everything else that you really do need today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was still innocent back then, I think.
Yeah. So what do you do with your life after that?
I went back to LA and started working. First, I was at the Ambassador Hotel where Bobby Kennedy was shot, and which was I love that place. It's tore down now, but it was just so much history. And then I went to to work at another Hollywood history hotel called the Chateau Marmont Hotel, and it's still there, and the big stars are still coming, and it was a very different place. It was a really, really good time. We interacted with all the stars, the people who worked there, in a very familiar way, because it was that kind of a place where people would stay sometimes for months when they were making a movie or cutting a record. And but Robert De Niro, I think, had the penthouse for like 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've said that if I ever got super wealthy, I wouldn't be buying castles around the world. I'd just be renting out the penthouse in a hotel, so I didn't have to worry about all the other details.
Exactly. Exactly. That was
that kind of money. Why do you want to worry about keeping the grounds?
Yeah. Yeah, it was so charmed. Yeah. It was a charm life for many people. I think. And we had people who come back all the time, like Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Joni Mitchell will be coming to see them there. It was a lot of the, it was, every day was a star sighting, at least one.
Wow.
Cat's
well, now that's in this. And those stories are in your other book, right? The one that you have just in Norwegian at the moment?
Some of those stories are in my Norwegian book. I am working on an English book together with one of my co-workers. So, Chateau Marmont. It's called If Walls Could Talk.
Well, that sounds like that's going to be another interesting read.
Yeah, it just and I think that was another one that was hard to do, because in the beginning everybody was telling me you really need to write a book about working at the Chateau Marmont, and for some reason I felt very loyal to the people there, and in a way they came to stay there, and even still do in a way, because they came because they knew that whatever they did, they would be protected from the media.
Right. Well, today, I mean, the media is, 1,000 times more aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
In what they do. I mean, I can't imagine, how the early '60s would have ever survived with that kind of, not only scrutiny, but it's almost intrusion.
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
I mean, you have to feel sorry for anybody who's celebrity today because, when they start hunting you, there's no place that you can go that's really safe from them.
Yeah, and it must be really bothersome to the extent of just driving you crazy at times to be under that kind of surveillance. And
right, and it's not only the stars themselves; it's their families.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I can see why Alec Baldwin starts swinging at them at times, because they
me
just
too.
don't.
Yeah.
It's just not him. It's his kids or his wife or girlfriend or whatever stage he's at. I mean, and it's relentless.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of amazing that you have all these stories. You seem to. I don't know. It almost seems to me like God put you like in their paths, like as an observer or something.
Oh, I don't know why it has been. My life turned out that way because it certainly was not something that I went after or tried to do or wanting to do. It just I was just this sort of naive, blue-eyed girl from the country who sort of happened to have all these things happen to me, and maybe that was why I had a sort of breakdown back in '65 when I went back to Norway because it was too much.
Yeah. Well, particularly in the '60s, this whole thing had to be. I mean, I don't know of any other time period that would have been similar to that, for somebody on the sideline of it, observing it all. I can't think of anybody who would be in that position, so that was kind of a unique one for you to be in.
Yeah, I guess it was. I didn't really think of it at the time. It just, it was what it was. You don't reflect on these things when you're 18 or 19.
Right.
Right.
No.
You just.
No, that's.
You're just
that's
young, and you sort of you want to do what other young people do: fall in love and go dancing.
Well, I think it should go the other way around, but.
Yeah, it just basically that's what it was. So it was. I just read this thing about Miriam Faithfull, and she's talking about ending up on the streets of London as a drug addict, as a junkie, and how in a way that was the first time she was, as a teenager, was anonymous and not being recognized. And how what a kind of relief that was in a way, even though she was in a bad way, but that was kind of a relief, and I can kind of understand that. I do understand what she's saying because I saw that a lot when I was in the midst of it, and of course I became part of it because I was there. And you go out and you eat, and people come and want to have your autograph, or they, young kids chase you down the street and want your hanky and your shoelace or whatever.
Like I cracked up on that story. What, they were stealing shoelaces out of the rock band people's shoes or something?
Yeah. I remember Phil Mayne's mom was just amazed. She says, "How do they even? Why do they want it?" She would go out and buy all these shoelaces for his shoes because the fans would take them.
So there's probably a collection that'll end up on eBay one day.
Yeah. Oh, isn't that funny? I have to look for that.
But it is true. I mean, I don't know that I was around celebrities as much as what I was with, politicians and that in my career. Mm-hmm. And you'd always have people, they always wanted something.
Yeah, I would imagine with politicians too, yeah.
Yeah, and then it became kind of old, after a while. I can't imagine, that's why you basically have staff and bodyguards and all kinds of other stuff around you to try to filter all of that out.
Yeah.
So that,
Because there's no way you can deal with all of it. It's just, I don't think it's humanly possible, and especially not for really young people who maybe are not that good at looking after themselves or realizing and seeing what's what.
Right. Yeah, because that's, at the age that you're, in your early 20s, you're as old as you've ever been. So you think you know everything.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
This wealth and fame comes quickly, and you don't really, you don't know what's going to happen next. In some ways, you think it's always going to continue that way. And then you overlay it with this whole, the whole drug culture that really started in the 60s.
Yeah.
Where, people didn't believe that the drugs were bad. I remember when cocaine first reappeared, I don't know, you probably saw it sooner than I did, but, in the 70s when it reappeared, everybody was saying, Freud used cocaine, so there was no real downside to it. That was just the government telling you that it was a bunch of, they didn't want you to have fun kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden it starts turning out, well, there was really a reason it needed to be taken, and controlled.
Yeah.
Because it created a whole other thing.
Yeah, it did, and then there were excesses, and there was that innocence and that thinking that one of the reasons they didn't want you to take drugs was because they couldn't make any money on it if you bought it, and the government couldn't put taxes on it or something. That was like a lot of people had different stories.
Right, and some of it was kind of true because they, I guess marijuana has always been demonized and whatever. Not that I don't know whether we should be giving 10-year-olds marijuana.
No,
but that's always the problem with legalization, because it's always what age do you legalize things. So there's always going to be a black market. It's in some ways I think it's a no-win situation no matter what we do. But then. So if people believed that this was going to create monsters and it didn't, so then people would think, well, everything else wasn't true either, and then off the path they would go, or down the path they would go. I want to go back to something else I had read, which I thought was kind of fascinating in your stuff, because when you were in San Francisco or whatever, you talked about everybody having a guru. Oh,
yeah. That was, how everybody did, it seemed like, or... Not everybody, but it was, people would find their guru either there that they would go, they would belong to like an ashram or whatever you call it, or they would, have other branch out into like communes that would just travel and go off into, the distant places like New Mexico or just start their own thing. It was very spiritual minded.
Right.
In San Francisco in the late 60s. And I think also, like my friend in London was obviously in London or in England, it was quite a bit of that too, because my friend went off into belonging to I don't think it was Hare Krishna, because then you had the Hare Krishna, and actually I think in LA there's still a building that belongs to the Hare Krishna where they serve free food once a week or something. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I think George Harrison was donated quite a bit of money to the Hare Krishna movement.
Yes. then I did crack up because when you were, I guess, introduced to Keith Moon or something, you thought he potentially was a Moonie.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I guess. I had no idea who he was.
Oh.
And I think Keith was a bit surprised that I didn't know who he was too.
Well, I cracked up that he wanted to take you out or something, and you kept putting him off, and then you go out and he's got a Rolls or something, and he couldn't figure out what that was about.
Yeah, and he had a driver and a nice Rolls Royce. So I asked him what he did for a living.
Oh. Well,
yeah. So
it was probably one of the ways you. It was probably one of the ways you ingratiated to them all to it, because you weren't like starstruck.
No, I sort of I was busy with my own life. I just I think Elvis was the last one I was ever starstruck with. And of course, I did have the chance to be his guest in Las Vegas at one time, but I didn't go.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there was part of that story. They wouldn't let you leave or something, right?
They wouldn't let me off work, and I figured I was so happy to finally have a good job that I, that supported both me and the child. And I thought, well, I'm just not going to see Elvis then. That was so sad.
Oh, that's another. That's why I say that whole drug thing became such a nightmare as an overlay. I mean, it killed off so many people.
Yeah.
And talented people. It was.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I think I said that a little bit before we went on the air, was that a good portion of my friends never made 30. They just it killed them, and it just wasn't drugs. I had a guy drank himself to death. Well, Jim Morrison drank himself to death.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a sad story. That really is. I never met him, and I was never. But I had friends that knew the Doors and Jim Morrison quite well.
Well,
yeah.
It was funny. In the 90s, I dated a woman who had been married to a rock star at the time, and I won't mention either, but she was living with a girlfriend in a bungalow or something, and I guess Jim Morrison was dating her. So she would tell me these stories of Jim Morrison coming over and knocking on the door looking for the girlfriend. So
funny.
Yeah, like I say, it's a small world. Once you start realizing that we're only a few people away from anybody.
Exactly, and that's what it is when you start talking to people and you realize that. But I think my girlfriend, who was a big Kurt Vonnegut fan, once said it so. And it sounded very right to me. She said that we should all recognize our family. And in a way, I think some people just think and feel the same way. We seem to travel in the same circles and know the same people and all the time. And it's just, that's our family in a way. Or maybe it's our universal family, or I don't know. Maybe, I don't know, I don't even begin to understand what it is, but it certainly seems that way in my life.
Well, it's certainly wonderful. We're really out of time, so we can find your books on Amazon?
Yes, they're on Amazon, and for now, I have a Facebook page, and and I'm on Twitter. And I am planning on setting up my own page for my book, which
I will put you on my websites and on Twitter as well, so that people will know where to find you.
Lovely.
And so, with that, I think if you just stay on the line, I just need to cover a couple of things, and then we'll be good.
Okay.
You can find out more information about my book series, The Archangel Jeremiel and the War to Conquer Heaven, at my website, www.john-j-higgins.com, and more about other episodes for this radio show at www.hangingwithhiggins.com. Thanks to ourtruth.com for making this broadcast possible. That's our-truth.com. And also look for the radio shows Hallowed Souls with Leah Simpson and The Cellar with Reverend Robin Marie, also on our-truth.com. So thank you and good night.